Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to grab a water. Let's sit down here. Do you want one as well?
Sure, thank you.
There go.
We know it's the end of the conference and you've had a good time, I'm sure, but everybody's ready and raring to get home, I'm sure. So we'll only keep you for about 4 or 5 hours on this piece of it. I hope that's okay.
I think I just lost my microphone. There we go.
We hear you.
I'm good. Good morning. We are so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join you. I'm really glad that you showed that video to kick things off because I think it is the part of the story that we're leading to. And before we get to why we started Biddy and Beau's Coffee, we thought we'd give you a little background on what led us to that point in our lives. So I'm going to sit down for a second here and tell you a little story about me and Mr. Wright.
I want to hear this.
So I grew up the oldest of 5 children in Pennsylvania, and my parents would be the first to tell you that I always had an entrepreneurial spirit. They liked to tease me that on Saturday mornings I would wake up before anybody else and collect items from around the house and display them on a table so that when my parents came down in the morning, I could sell them to them. So I was always thinking business, and in addition to that, I loved theater, musical theater in particular, and would put on backyard talent shows and invite everybody in the neighborhood to come over and be a part of that, and of course enlist my younger siblings. So growing up, I always was, I think, very creative, very entrepreneurial. And along the way, got to high school and decided, you know, what was I going to go off and study in college and make a life, a career out of. And the thing that brought me the most joy at that point in my life was theater. So I decided to go to study musical theater at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music.
Well, you started at Syracuse, right?
I did start at Syracuse, that's true. It was a little too cold for me, so that is true. But ended up transferring to Cincinnati and studied theater there, and was there the summer prior to my senior year, had heard buzz that a new transfer student was coming to the school. And everybody at UC was very excited about this transfer student because he was coming to study theater, but ironically had already had a very successful career on Broadway. And I was trying not to fall into the oohing and ahhing over this student coming to the school like all of my friends were, and apparently gave off that energy when I did finally meet him, who is now my husband, but But Ben came there. It was my summer before my senior year. He came as a transfer student. You had already studied where had you studied? IU.
I started at New York University and then Indiana University. Transferred to Cincinnati.
Right.
Met you.
Right. And it's funny, he'll tell you that things sometimes happen to the wrong people. And in his situation, as a teenager, his talent scout had come to his city, Indianapolis, and was looking for just random new talent to bring to New York. And Ben has the voice of an angel and got up and sang, and it just kind of grew up being a boy chorister, really, and doing some community theater and things like that. And when he sang for this agent, of course, she was like wowed and wanted to keep you in mind for any future roles that came up. And so it was, I don't know, weeks later maybe she called you and said that there was a show that was that you should audition for at Playwrights Horizons. See, I have been paying attention all these years. Yeah. Playwrights Horizons, and why don't you take over on that part? What was?
Yeah, so it was, they were looking for a 16-year-old redhead that could sing, and at the time I was 15 and I had hair and it was red, and so I went up and I was lucky and I was offered the role, and it was actually one of the first shows that George C. Wolfe did. I don't know if you're familiar with George C. Wolfe, pretty prolific guy in New York. But anyway, it was short-lived, but it was sort of my first foray into that professional world of theater. So you want me to keep going, or you go ahead?
From there, something pretty amazing happened, and I'll let you keep talking about how it came to be.
Well, long story short, not to go too deeply into the weeds, but at that time, Ira Weitzman and Andre Bishop, who now sort of run Lincoln Center up in New York, have for a long time, they were the powers that be at Playwrights Horizons back in the mid-'80s. And anyway, they called and said that Stephen Sondheim is doing this new musical, Into the Woods, and they can't seem to find somebody to play the role of Jack the Giant Killer, the one who climbs the beanstalk. So I went up there and auditioned, and once again got lucky as all get out, and was cast in the role and originated the role of Jack in Into the Woods back in 1987. And
do you mind opening that for me?
No, go ahead.
I don't know if any of you have ever seen Into the Woods, but it's one of those musicals that's still with us because PBS Playhouse came and videotaped it. So it's one of those, I don't know, how many years ago was that, Ben?
Well, gosh, what is that, over 30 years ago?
Over 30, yeah. So at any rate, here's this Broadway legend coming to the University of Cincinnati to really finish up his undergraduate degree, because at the time
Can you open this for me? Okay, sorry.
You were going to proceed with going on to study film, I believe, and get a master's in film. And so we met, it was August
92.
92, that's right. And by New Year's Eve of 93, I mean, just a couple months later, Ben proposed to me in Times Square. The ball dropped on New Year's Eve, and he asked me to marry him. And
I'm pretty sure her dad still watches every episode of America's Most Wanted every week to make sure my face doesn't show up there somehow, because that was a wicked quick courtship, wasn't it?
It was very quick.
But we're coming up on 29 years
right.
That's right. In May.
So at the time, I wanted to go to New York, and I mean, I had studied theater. It was my dream to go there and hopefully be in a Broadway show one day. And Ben had already done it and had checked all these boxes, and I was able to twist his arm a little bit and convince him that we should go give it a shot together. So we moved to New York together as newlyweds, and we spent probably 6 months out of the first 12 months we lived there together, because the other 6 months you were off making a film, Penny Marshall's Renaissance Man, with Danny DeVito and Mark Wahlberg, and it was a fun project for Ben to work on, and I feel like there was something else in that time period.
Ford's Theater.
Right, you did a show at Ford's Theater, but it wasn't. We didn't feel what we had signed up for as far as marriage went, and he was gone 6 months, and I was living in New York by myself, and so at that point we said, we're going to leave New York and we're going to go start a life in Cary, North Carolina, because my parents lived in Chapel Hill at the time, and it seemed, it was affordable. It seemed like a good place to make some roots. So we moved to Cary, and we were living what we thought was the, American dream, and mowing the lawn and barbecuing on the back porch and taking walks in the evening. And lo and behold, the phone rings, and it's Broadway again, essentially. And they were asking Ben if he would play one of the lead roles in a Broadway musical that was being, well, it wasn't a revival because it was a film that was then being adapted for Broadway called State Fair. And the idea was that it was going to go on the road and tour the country, and if they built enough momentum through that national tour to get a spot, to get a Broadway theater, that it would eventually go to Broadway. But Ben, was offered the role, and my sweet husband said, I'm not going on the road again without my wife, so you've got to audition her too and see if you can plug her into the show. And I had a background in, of course, musical theater and singing and dancing, and was able to, I was cast in the show as well. So we went on the road for 6 months with State Fair, And there
Best
was...
dancer in the show,
Well...
bar none.
Thank you.
Tour jeté through the roof.
But it was, what city were we in? Was it Boston? Maybe we were on the road, and all the producers had come and gathered on stage, and they said, we have some exciting news for you. State Fair is going to Broadway. And I still get goosebumps when I think about it, because it was my dream. You know, growing up, I thought that was what I wanted to do. And the show ended up running on Broadway for 3 months, maybe. And
it was not well received.
Not well received, very, very wholesome, and anyway,
right.
It was a fun experience. But after the show closed, I felt like I could check the box myself and really wanted to start a family. And so we left New York at that point and ended up in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where we live now and have lived for 26, 7 years. Yeah. And so we settled in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we soon after welcomed our first child, Lily, who's 23 years old now. And her story is very interesting. We'll share a little bit about that more as the Biddy and Bo's coffee journey story develops. But Lily is 23, and then we had a second daughter, Emma Grace, who is 21. And just recently graduated from NYU with a degree in film and television, and does all of our videos for us. So it's wonderful to have someone in the family that can really help us share the story. And so we have our 2 little girls and just doing life, and find out that we are, now this is 4 or 5 years later, that I'm pregnant again. So it's our 3rd child. And learned through the power of ultrasound that we were expecting a little boy. And you can imagine how excited we were. We loved our girls, and we felt like this was going to just round out our family. And right from the beginning, we knew we were going to name him after Ben. Just very excited. And then fear started to creep in through my pregnancy, because I had taken a prenatal test, just AFP screening, which is very common. It's not non-invasive, and just due to my maternal age, the doctor recommended that we find out if there were any markers for any birth defects. And didn't really think much of it at the time, and got back the results, which showed that the child I was carrying had an increased risk for Down syndrome. And I can tell you that learning that at that point in my pregnancy was very frightening. We didn't know anybody with Down syndrome. Growing up, our schools, our generation, the kids with disabilities were very segregated. We hadn't had conversations with people with disabilities. It's just so interesting to think back on that. And so there was so much fear when the doctors told us he could have Down syndrome. So much fear that we wanted more opinions. We wanted more, medical opinions to basically, we were looking for a doctor to tell us that test was wrong. And I remember we took a trip up to Chapel Hill, and we went up there that day thinking, we just want to hear somebody tell us it doesn't look like he has Down syndrome. And that doctor did. That doctor said, you know what, I think they're wrong. I don't think he has Down syndrome. And so for the next 20 weeks of our pregnancy, there was relief, and there was, okay, everything's going to be okay. But there was a part of me that just deep down knew that our lives were about to change. And sure enough, Bo was born on July 14th, 2004. And when he was, you were in the delivery room, and I think you knew right from the beginning that he looked a little bit different than our older girls with his muscle tone. There are some markers that just indicate that a child could have Down syndrome, but you don't know until you do a karyotype test. You don't know until the blood work comes back. And so we spent the next 3 days, every doctor, nurse in the hospital must have come into our room, looking at him like he was a science experiment, Some would say, no, he doesn't. Some would say, yes, he does. We went home with him. And I just remember sitting there the day that the doctor called because the karyotype test had come back and the doctor confirmed that he did have Down syndrome. And Ben and I were just overwhelmed with grief in that moment. We were so sad to learn that news. We cried, we prayed, we felt helpless and hopeless. And it was a couple, maybe it was a day or two, I mean, it's all a blur, that something shifted in us, and we realized that raising Bo should be no different than raising our girls who were typically developing, and we just decided to embrace him for who he was and be the best parents we could be, educate ourselves on what Down syndrome was, provide for him, give him the services he needed, help him, achieve all these things that you would want for any of your children. But there were still concerns even at that early stage of, will he ever get married? Will he walk? I mean, I remember thinking, will he walk? Now I'm like, I cannot believe I thought that. Will he talk? Will he go to college? All these concerns that you have when you don't know what Down syndrome is. So it was at about 10 weeks when Ben discovered that Bo was actually blind, that he was born with bilateral cataracts in both eyes. And so on top of everything else we were dealing with, we're discovering another whole, level of concern. And we had to go through a number of eye surgeries, and I'm happy to report that Bo sees very well now, thanks to our doctors who removed the cataracts, and he wore glasses for a long time and contact lenses as a baby, which is a whole nother story. But we really just kind of immersed ourselves in Down syndrome, and we would start doing advocacy work here and start, host a buddy walk here, do a concert here, blog, try to get other people to learn about it along with us on our journey. And we were doing, I feel like we had really settled into life and we're doing just fine with all of that. And then we learned we were pregnant again with our fourth child. And I remember my mom, who has since passed away at the time, said to me, I hope this child you're carrying has Down syndrome too. And I share that with you because that's not a very typical thing to say from a mother to a daughter. I hope your child has Down syndrome. But for us, because we had been through bringing Bo into the world and raising him and seeing all of the wonderful ways he enriched our lives and made us better people, she had that perspective too and wanted that for us, and we wanted that too. We knew what Down syndrome was. We weren't scared of it. And sure enough, Biddy was born with Down syndrome too. And it's very rare. I don't even know if there are statistics on how many parents have two biological children with Down syndrome that aren't twins. They are 5 years apart. And I can tell you that Biddy joining our family completed our family and brought so much love and joy and perspective to our lives. So I'll stop talking for a second. And
no, you're doing great. I'm going to just keep going.
Let you talk about.
I think one of the things that really became clear to us early on is that once people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I'll just call that IDD going forward, once people with IDD get through the public school system, it's kind of lights out. There's really not anything for them to do. Once in a while, you'll find somebody who does get a job. Maybe it's bagging groceries or clearing trays or breaking down boxes somewhere. And a job's a job, and that's great. I'm not knocking that. but it's the exception, but not the rule. And we just looked at each other and we said, our kids are headed straight for that cliff, and we've got to do something about this, because we didn't think that was right. We didn't really know at the time what would happen, but we knew we didn't want our kids falling off that cliff.
Well, and just to put a little more color on that, I mean, 80% of people with disabilities in our country are unemployed. 80% of them. 1 in 5 people in our country has a disability, and 80% of them don't have jobs. And most of them want jobs. I mean, most of them want meaningful employment. So,
and when she says disability, she doesn't necessarily mean IDD. It could be, loss of sight, loss of hearing, sort of at a minimum, and then all the way to the profound types of disabilities, and then everything in between. But 1 in 5, I mean, I'd be interested, just a show of hands, is there anybody, raise your hand if there's somebody in your life who has a disability. I bet you darn near over half the group. Yeah, I mean, it touches everybody, and the piece of it that when we talk about this, we're talking about congenital disabilities, right? The ones that you're born with. And the fact of the matter is that's only part of the story, right? There are acquired disabilities. We say all the time, before dinner tonight, everybody in this room could join the group, right? I mean, we're all hanging on by a thread. In one car accident, one stroke, one slip and fall and hit your head a little too hard, and you just join the group. And then what does your life look like, right? So
we start thinking about, what does Bo's future look like? What does Biddy's future look like? And we didn't want the lights to go out. And while they don't work in our coffee shops yet, it was something where we just started planning ahead and thinking, why aren't there more businesses that employ people with disabilities? And probably it's because people with disabilities have been so unseen for so long. You don't care about what you don't see. And people with disabilities have been kind of pushed to the side, marginalized, segregated for so long that we're just kind of conditioned not to see them. And Ben and I will be the first to admit that it wasn't that we didn't care about people with disabilities, it's that they weren't on our radar at all until Bo was born. And so we started thinking, how do you put people with disabilities, people that we care about, how do we make other people see the value that we see in our kids' lives and other people's lives with disabilities? And it was all about bringing people together. For us, we would think about, gosh, when we have friends over and they spend time with Biddy and Bo, they leave that experience feeling differently about Down syndrome and feeling, I don't know, maybe a transformation of the heart, because for the first time, they're seeing people with Down syndrome differently. And so it was happening again and again, and we were thinking, how do you multiply, magnify that feeling? And I was taking a shower one day, and it hit me that a coffee shop could be the perfect place to bring people together, people with and without disabilities, and spend time, have a great cup of coffee, and through that experience, have some transformation of the heart. So I was in the shower, got this idea, ran out, told Ben, I said, we got to have a coffee shop. That's next step in our lives. And you thought I was crazy.
This was in November of 2015, and by January 16th or 26th of, doesn't matter, 2016, just a few months later, this coffee shop was opened. That's how fast it happened.
And it was originally called Bo's Coffee, which you saw in the video. It was just a tiny little 500 square foot spot. We started out with 19 employees with disabilities. Some had Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy.
Tons of undiagnosed disabilities. There are more undiagnosed instances of IDD than there are clinically diagnosed ones.
But we didn't have any background in retail, in food service.
We didn't know anything about
merchandising,
coffee. Nothing.
Didn't know what
Nothing.
we were doing.
We knew we liked to drink it.
Nothing.
but didn't know anything about it.
But you know, the internet's a wonderful thing, and we were just 24/7 absorbing as much as we could. We had some friends who were coffee roasters at the time who gave us an intense education on that. And it was a family affair. You know, we got the whole gang up there involved in putting tables together, and my gosh, it was just a hole in the wall kind of a place. We had a mini fridge in the back. It wasn't even a full-size refrigerator because there wasn't room for it. And I would stop at Food Lion every morning after I took the kids to school to pick up enough milk to get us through the day. And we had a little answering machine that sat on top of the mini refrigerator. And surprisingly, we were 2 days into it, and I came into work and pushed play on the tape recorder, and it was the Rachel Ray Show calling. It was a producer from the Rachel Ray Show who had seen through the power of social media what we had started there in Wilmington, North Carolina. And we couldn't accommodate the people that had shown up. I mean, just lines out the door. We could only seat maybe 15 people in the shop total. And the Rachel Ray Show had seen it on social media and wanted to come bring a film crew down and do a story. And that really catapulted our ability to reach people all over the country. So here we are, you know, just in Wilmington, getting all this national attention, because from there it was fast forward all the way to CNN Heroes. I mean, there was a firestorm, a wonderful firestorm of media attention that happened organically. We didn't ever have to pay for marketing because people just heard about us through social media and wanted to come experience Bitty and Beau's coffee, and so that was just a marvelous organic thing that happened. But when we were 6 months old, we moved when we were 6 months old. So when we were 3 months old, we were approached by a local business owner who had this abandoned Hummer building on his car lot, and he said, "Y'all need more space. You should move into this old building that we're not selling Hummers out of anymore." And that is where our headquarters is now. It's 5,000 square feet. And so we moved there when we were 6 months old. And that was wonderful because then we could start welcoming tons of people to the shop, and field trips would come, and people would come from all over, I'm not exaggerating, the globe, because they had heard about us. A lot of them had children with disabilities and wanted to get a peek at what was possible and feel inspired. And then there were, you know, 1 in 5 people having disabilities in our country, it touches everybody's life in some way. And they wanted to come see what was this phenomenon, this coffee shop where people with disabilities are running the shop. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that's like when you walk into one of our coffee shops?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about it is I look back and you know, we really started the coffee shop back in 2016 because we wanted a place for Bitty and Beau to work, right, at a minimum. And what we have realized over time is that while we've created lots of jobs, I think we employ over 300 people with disabilities. I don't know how many shops we have, 24?
We have 11 open and another 13 coming.
To open. So we employ a lot of people with disabilities and without disabilities, by the way. And that's fantastic. But the real power of the coffee shop is for the guests that come in, the people without disabilities who come in and witness something that you really just can't find anywhere else. You know, and I think it speaks to also I think there's an innate hunger in most people to connect with other people, especially groups that maybe you know something about, but you've never really had an opportunity. And people with IDD, I think there's a reticence, understandably. How do I connect? How do I relate to somebody with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or autism? How do I do that? That makes me nervous, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to embarrass that person. I don't want to be embarrassed. And you know, I'm not making fun of anybody. I get it, because I felt the same way before Beau was born 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago now. You know, I always say I didn't think well of people with disabilities, and I didn't think poorly of them. I just didn't really think about them at all. And the coffee shop gives you that normal atmosphere, right? It's not me inviting you to come to a special event for people with disabilities, which you might want to do, but it might make you a little nervous. It's, hey, come get a cup of coffee. Come see this. And it's such a visceral experience for people. I mean, we hear it all the time. And you have to forgive me. I think it's just getting older. If you say salt and pepper, I might shed a tear. I cried about everything. But it's a very visceral experience. And I think what happens is that you begin to see yourself in people with disabilities, right? You may not want to, but if you allow yourself to do that, then there's this level of humanity that creeps in, right, to the situation, to the relationship, and you start to maybe see something and feel something that heretofore you had never done, and that's the real power of the coffee shop. And people, like Amy said, come far and wide to see it and feel it. And hopefully get a good cup of coffee too, because we don't want to be one of those places where they come for that element of it. They go, nice concept, but the coffee, So we work really hard at making sure that the food and drink and the whole atmosphere is really spot on. But we didn't know that when we started 6 years ago. We didn't know that the real power of the coffee shop, it's almost more for people without disabilities than it is for the jobs that it creates for people with disabilities. And that's been a really interesting transformation. And our goal, I hope I'm not jumping ahead too far.
Well, let me just fill in a couple of blanks. So we opened in Wilmington. People started reaching out to us and saying, we need this in our city because it works in every city. There is an untapped labor pool everywhere, and people with disabilities and their families are hungry for this opportunity. And the guests, who are making trips across the country to come see these shops, will support it wherever we open it. But so Ben and I decided, from Wilmington we would open a second shop, which we did in Charleston. Great success. Decided, let's do one in Savannah. Let's keep working down the coast. Great success. Decided we would go up north, and we opened one in Annapolis. And great success, but then COVID hit. And we had only been open for 2 months when COVID hit. And we just had to really put things on pause. For 2 months, we temporarily closed our doors. And then when we reopened, business looked different. Our shops are all about connection, human connection, bringing people together, high fives, conga lines, community. And we had some obstacles to overcome to still create that experience in spite of the disease we were dealing with. But it also, so we had some quieter time there where Ben and I got to thinking, we can't open enough of these shops. We can't do what needs to be done fast enough. We're going to run out of days in our own life, and we want to see this 80% statistic really changed before we take our last breath. And so we said, I think our best and highest use is teaching other people how to do this. And that's when we started franchising Biddy and Beau's Coffee. And so I guess it was it 2020? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the fall of 2020, we started offering franchises. And we have sold 20 now, and 5 are open, and another 15 are under construction or at some point in development. And we feel like we're just getting started. They range, they're all over the country, from Boston to Waco, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina. We've got ones opening in Dallas and Austin and Houston. And I mean, there's just so much momentum, so much hunger in our country for this right now. We feel like we are a human rights movement disguised as a coffee shop, and it's resonating with people. And so I kind of wanted to catch them up on, you say, where we hope we're going with this.
Yeah, well, it's just, it's perspective. It's perspective, and I don't begin to pretend to have the knowledge and expertise that all of you have in design and how things should look, but But I feel like I know when I do like the way something looks. And, when you give people perspective on something, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel it. You can't, what do they say? The toothpaste is out of the tube, right? And we feel like that's what we're trying to do. And, we can't think of anything greater than somebody coming into one of our coffee shops and seeing it and going back out into their own life and really giving it some thought and going, I wonder if I could hire somebody like that, my own place of business. So that's kind of our end goal, right, is we could open up 50,000 coffee shops. It wouldn't put a dent in the 200 million people with IDD across the world, 80% of whom don't have employment. But when other businesses start to consider it and think about it, then all of a sudden, it's not the exception, it's the rule. And importantly, and we didn't get this either when we started, we are a for-profit entity. We are not a nonprofit. And the reason for that is because of the message that sends. Charity has its place, no doubt about it. We're big believers in it and big contributors to charity. But this particular population is arguably, categorically seen through the lens of charity. And that's part of the problem for them, is they can't get out of that. They're always looked at as charity cases. So what we're trying to do as a business is blow that myth out of the air and say, you don't have to always look at people with disabilities as charity cases. They're real people. They operate differently. And business, if it's about anything, is about innovation. And what an opportunity to innovate around people with disabilities in the workplace. I mean, that nut hasn't even begun to be cracked yet. That the artificial intelligence, the technology, the systems. For instance, in our coffee shops, we have a front bar and a back bar. In most coffee shops, when you go in there, some of the equipment's on the front bar, right? It's in between you and the barista. We push all the equipment to the back bar, and the reason for that is because we don't want there to be any physical barriers in between the guests and our employees. We want the guests to see them working. We want to see them doing well. We want to see them making mistakes, and the person without a disability, the shift supervisor, coming over and correcting them. We want people to see that so they understand that it's not the overwhelming task that we all perhaps think that it is. I oftentimes say, when Bo was born, wouldn't it have been nice if we could have dropped everything going on in our lives and gone back to school and gotten a PhD in special education? Would have been great. Nobody does that. Can't do that, right? So what do you do as a parent? You figure it out, right? You innovate as a family, and you figure it out. Or you don't, right? And you do something else. But the opportunity there is to innovate. And I think the same is true for business, is to innovate, because there's a whole world there of people. And I always think too, oh, by the way, it might be me, it might be you, it might be one of you someday who finds herself in a position where you can't do anymore what you used to do. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if business just said, I got that. When that happens, this is what we do, this is how we do it. All of our systems are touch screen, right? We don't take cash, we only take credit, and there are some places that require cash. But overwhelmingly, we don't do that. We try to keep it simple. Can our employees count back change? Many of them can. Many of them know it's a challenge. So we just say, to heck with that. That's not what we're here to do. Let's pay with credit. Let's get our heads up. Let's engage. Let's have these moments. We have a system where instead of writing your name on your order or your cup, has anybody ever had their name butchered at a coffee shop? So we've sort of bypassed that. We innovated around that, and we had this idea where let's get two decks of cards. So you come in and you get your cup of coffee, and once you've paid for it, you're given the Queen of Hearts. The barista is also given the Queen of Hearts with your order, and it runs through the line, and when your order is ready, they hold up Queen of Hearts. And they yell, hopefully, Queen of Hearts. Some can, some can't. They hold it up, and you come and you match your Queen of Hearts. And it's another moment of connection. It's another moment of interaction. And that's what we're all about.
Well, and now, in the interest of time, I'll tell you one more story I alluded to at the beginning about our oldest daughter, Lily, and then we'd love to open it up to any questions you have. But Lily, who's now 23, was diagnosed at age 20, so we're already 3 years into Biddy and Bo's Coffee, and she's diagnosed with autism. So interestingly, for our family, getting a later in life diagnosis like that, Lily had already great perspective, having been the older sister of Biddy and Bo, and being around people at Biddy and Bo's Coffee Shop that had autism. And for her, it was a sense of relief to have that diagnosis, because she always knew she was different in ways that, connecting with people socially, executive functioning, spatial things. And for her to get that diagnosis, I can't help but think that because she already felt comfortable with the disability community, that when she learned that she had autism, it was okay. And that's really what we're hoping, that every guest that comes into our shop, every experience, every moment that happens there is tucked away in a person's mind, so that someday, should they be faced with something like that in their lives, it will feel okay too.
Yeah. Trying to normalize disability in the world, because I would argue that it's not normalized. It's sort of, it's not looked upon favorably typically, right? It's just sort of a, oh no, or it's a, oh that's too bad, or oh I'm sorry, and I get that, but it's part of humanity. It happens, and it's not going to not happen. Accidents happen, things happen to people, right? Either they're born with it or they're not. So what an opportunity to get in front of that. And we really think business is the way to do it. Charity, again, has its place, but business, I think, is the key. If charity was the answer, the statistic wouldn't stand, right? 80% of people with disabilities would be employed, but they're not, because it just doesn't occur to most people that what's possible. So the coffee shop's all about showing people what's possible, normalizing that, and we're having a heck of a lot of fun doing it.
And getting a great cup of coffee. I mean, we're Rachel Ray's preferred coffee, so we're pretty proud of that people are drawn to it for different reasons. And if they're drawn to it because they see coffee on the sign and they come in and they get their great cup of coffee, they're also going to have this great transformative experience. And that's kind of the Trojan horse in it all.
Yeah, for sure.
At any rate.
Can we open up the floor to any questions? Does anybody want to ask anything of us? We're happy to try to answer. Oh, I'm sorry.
Have you found that you have to pair together other people with the folks that have disabilities, and has that increased your cost of operation, or has it leveled out?
Great question. The question was, do we essentially pair people with and without disabilities to do the same job, right? Or one to support the other? The answer quickly is no. And that's also intentional. There is a notion out there, I think, that if you're going to hire somebody with a disability, you better have a job coach with them, right? And to be clear, some people do need a job coach. But we've tried to set up our systems, being parents of kids with disabilities, we've tried to set up our systems such that they don't. And what we try to do is have the people without disabilities, the shift supervisors, the general managers, sort of simmer in the background. And when they see a little support necessary, they step up, they help, they step back, right? So the stars of the show are the people with the disabilities. So we haven't really had that experience, but it's been intentional on our part. And we don't allow job coaches behind the bar. We don't want that. Sometimes once in a while you get somebody sit out in the shop, and it's just the arrangement that they have with the person. But that's part of our point, is we don't want people to think that in order to hire people with disabilities, you have to have two people for one job. Sometimes you do, but we try to make it so that they don't. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
Now that you're franchising, is there a fear or concern that the culture you've established has to be carefully watched? Like, or do you guys do spot checks? Like, how do you make sure that you keep the vision that you guys have established?
Yes. So the question was, are we afraid franchising, we may get the wrong franchisees and things, the culture that we've created doesn't hold up? It's a really important question. Yes, and unfortunately we say no to applicants a lot more than we say yes. And we also get sort of a related question, are most of our franchisees people that have someone in their family with a disability? I would say over half, yes, but not all. And it's really impressive when you find somebody who wants to do this, who doesn't have somebody directly in their inner circle with a disability. But we vet very thoroughly, background check people and talk to people a lot and really try to get to know them quite well before we make them an offer of a franchise. And then we have closed circuit televisions 24/7 in all of the shops where we can see and real-time reporting.
A team that supports all of that.
Yeah, and we do spot checks. We secret shop things and do spot checks, not just for the culture, but also are they stirring the drinks? Are the products right?
The other cool thing that is kind of just organically happened is some of the partnerships we've formed with other businesses that aren't franchising, but they are bringing Biddy and Bo's Coffee into their headquarters. And we just opened one at Encino, which is in Wilmington and is the leader in cloud banking.
Yeah, they're the world leader in cloud banking. Yeah.
But it's really cool because the way they're tackling that DEI situation is to say, let's bring Biddy and Bo's Coffee into our headquarters, and then people with disabilities are interacting and they have these meaningful paying jobs, and it's changing the culture on a corporate level. So that's neat too.
And you may have said this, but to be clear, they're not just bringing our coffee in. They actually built a Biddy and Bo's Coffee shop, a full-blown coffee shop with our branding and everything inside their world headquarters. And that's not a franchise, that's a special kind of arrangement we do, kind of like a business might put a health club in for their employees. It's kind of a subsidized sort of thing that the business does. But in any event, great question. Any other? Yes, sir.
Should you have to simplify your menu in order to make it work?
I think these are the best questions of all time.
Great questions.
Yes, we did. And we try to keep it simple. And to your point about the franchisees, there's a real tendency for when they get into business and they've invested all of this money and they're up and running, they're going like, people are asking for egg sandwiches. We don't serve egg sandwiches. We're like, that's right, we don't. And
we do. All of the specialty drinks you would find at any of our competitors: the frappes, the smoothies, the lattes, the flavors. And they're wonderful quality drinks. It's just we focus on what we're good at and not try to layer in the egg sandwiches.
We do muffins, we do cookies, we do cinnamon rolls, we do things that we're trying not to handle food, right? We're trying not to get into that whole echelon of food service and health department kind of stuff. That's not why we're in existence. We're in existence for the connection, right? So we do keep the menu simple as we can. Yes, sir.
How do you go about evaluating your job applicants for their viability to do the job? And because I would think that some people's disabilities are acute enough that they're not able to work with you. How do you go about evaluating that?
Brian, let me take that.
So anytime we open a new shop, we host a job fair, and it's a one-day event where we schedule interviews and get to know all the candidates. Most of our applicants have never had jobs before. Rarely they'll bring a resume with them, but we really just sit down and get to know their personalities and are kind of judging what is their willingness to learn. Do they want this? Is this something they want in their life? Because we can teach them. We've adapted all of our systems so that they can be really successful on the job. They don't have to know how to make a cappuccino before they come work for us, and nobody does. But we're really just looking for great attitudes and a willingness to learn new things, and we have great training programs for them.
We know what the positions are that we're looking for, and so we know the sorts of personalities that we have seen be successful in those positions. So we look for that. and no required experience. Because there's an interesting, with so many of them never having been employed before and their families not used to them having employment, there's a bit of a learning curve there, right? That we have to manage to some degree. And we can't, unfortunately, employ as many people as we'd like. In fact, most of the hiring fairs we have to cap at 100 people. We have no issue finding employees through
Or retaining them.
Or retaining them. Attrition is so non-existent it doesn't even show up as a statistic for us, which creates its own set of challenges, right? And as far as making sure you've got room for advancement in wage and also position within the company if possible. So. Most coffee shops, people don't hang around for a career, especially if they're working behind the bar. It's a great question. Any other questions? One more? Yes, ma'am.
So my best friend from college has 4 boys, and 3 of the 4 have autism. One is a set of twins, and I love those boys and love everything in this world. But he has the same fear that you've spoken about. Now the boys are getting older, and he doesn't know what they're going to do for a job. So any plans to ever come to Atlanta?
We would love to open in Atlanta, and we've talked to a number of folks down that way. And it just goes back to the earlier question about getting the right franchisees, and we just haven't quite found the right franchisee to make an offer to yet there.
You might have just found one.
Good. Have them go. Everything's on our website. The way to us is through our website. So anyway, but thank you.
Well, thank y'all.
Thank you so
Good.
much. Oh, sorry.
Thank
Big round of
you.
applause.
Thanks.